The sound of heavy machinery shattered the eerie silence of the gated community. Under the flickering streetlights, a team of construction workers wielding shovels and pickaxes converge on the well-manicured lawn of Karen's sprawling estate. Karen burst through her front door, trembling with rage. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the night. The foreman turned, his face cast in shadow. "Ma'am, we've been ordered to commence excavation on your property immediately." Karen's eyes narrowed. By whom? The foreman paused, an unreadable expression on his weathered face. "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information." Karen's jaw tightened. She knew exactly who was behind this, the power-hungry board of her homeowners association, hell-bent on controlling every aspect of her life. With a flash of determination, she stormed down the steps, marching up to the foreman. "I won't allow it. This is my property, and you have no right to be here. I demand you cease this operation at once." The foreman held up a gloved hand. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we have our orders. Now, I suggest you return inside before things get unpleasant." Karen's heart raced as she glanced at the ominous figures wielding tools, their faces obscure in the shadows. Refusing to be intimidated, she stood her ground. "I'm calling the police." The foreman's lips curled into a humorless smile. "Go ahead. But I can assure you they won't be able to stop us." Karen's blood ran cold. She knew the HOA had deep pockets and connections that often put them above the law. Turning on her heel, she stormed back into her house, slamming the door behind her. Rushing to her study, she yanked open a drawer and pulled out a thick file, her fingers trembling. Inside were meticulously documented records of the HOA's shady dealings, evidence she had been carefully gathering for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. Asterisk, this time they'd gone too far, asterisk, she thought, her jaw set with determination. Grabbing her phone, she began dialing a series of numbers, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't rely on the authorities. The HOA had them in their pocket. No, she would have to fight fire with fire, using their own tactics against them. As the phone rang, she couldn't help but glance out the window, her eyes narrowing at the ominous figures swarming her property. Whatever they were planning, she was determined to uncover the truth and put a stop to it, even if it meant going to war with the most powerful entity in the neighborhood. Asterisk, this is my home, and I won't let them take it from me without a fight, asterisk, she vowed, her resolve hardening with each passing second. The phone was answered on the other end, and Karen launched into a rapid-fire explanation of the situation, her voice laced with urgency. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, but the stakes had never been higher. If the HOA succeeded in whatever they were planning, it could mean the end of everything she had fought so hard to protect. As the conversation continued, Karen's expression shifted from one of determination to a subtle smirk. She had a plan, and if executed perfectly, it just might be enough to turn the tables on the HOA and their scheming ways. The stage was set for a high-stakes showdown, and Karen was more than ready to play. The sound of the excavator's engine thundered through the quiet neighborhood as the massive machine continued its relentless assault on Karen's lawn. She watched from the shadows of her study, her eyes narrowed with a mixture of fury and trepidation. Asterisk. What could they possibly be looking for? Asterisk, she wondered, her mind racing with possibilities. Glancing down the file in her hands, she knew the HOA had plenty of skeletons in their closet, but this sudden and cover operation felt different, more sinister. Steeling her nerves, Karen grabbed her phone and made a series of urgent calls, her voice hushed and intense. She knew she couldn't rely on the authorities, but there were other resources at her disposal, resources that could turn the tide in this high-stakes battle. As the sun began to rise, casting an eerie glow over the excavation site, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Karen watched from the window as a tall, imposing figure emerged, his sharp features and piercing gaze immediately commanding attention. Asterisk, finally, asterisk, she thought, relief mingling with the adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was her ace in the hole, a powerful ally with the resources and connections to take on the HOA's formidable influence. The man strode across the lawn, his presence demanding the construction workers' attention. Karen watched as he conversed with the foreman, his body language tense and authoritative. The workers hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances before slowly stepping away from the excavation site. Karen's heart pounded as she realized her gamble had paid off. The HOA's plans had been thwarted, at least for now. But she knew this was only the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous conflict. The HOA would not take this setback lightly, and she would need to be prepared for their retaliation. Clutching the file to her chest, Karen moved to the kitchen, her mind already wearing with her next moves. She needed to carefully review the evidence she had gathered, looking for any clues that could shed light on the HOA's true motivations. Only then could she devise a comprehensive strategy to take them down once and for all. As she poured a cup of strong black coffee, her gaze drifted back to the window, where the construction workers were slowly packing up their equipment. The air was thick with tension, and Karen couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the calm before the storm. Asterisk, they're not finished, asterisk, she thought, her jaw tightening with resolve. Asterisk, and neither am I, asterisk. The shadows stretched long across the freshly turned earth as the construction crew packed up their equipment and departed, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Karen watched from the window, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and trepidation. She had managed to halt the Ido's mysterious excavation, at least for the moment, but she knew they would not give up so easily. This was merely the opening salvo in a high-stakes battle of wits and wills, and she needed to be prepared for their inevitable retaliation. Clutching the incriminating file to her chest, Karen hurried to her study, her mind racing. She knew the HOA had eyes and ears everywhere, and she couldn't afford to let her guard down for even a moment. Carefully, she scanned the room, searching for any signs of tampering or hidden surveillance devices. Satisfied that she was alone, Karen spread the file's contents across her desk, her brow furrowed in concentration. The documents detailed a web of corruption, kickbacks, and underhanded dealings that stretched back for years, implicating nearly every member of the HOA board. Asterisk, if I can just get this information to the right people, asterisk, she thought, asterisk, I might finally be able to bring them down, asterisk. But as Karen reviewed the evidence, a chilling realization dawned on her. The HOA was not just any corrupt organization. They were a well-oiled machine capable of ruthlessly eliminating any threat to their power. And she'd just thrown herself directly into their crosshairs. A shiver ran down her spine as she recalled the foreman's ominous warning. The authorities were in the HOA's pocket, and Karen knew she couldn't rely on them for help. She was on her own, facing a relentless and merciless enemy who would stop at nothing to protect their stranglehold on the community. Steeling her nerves, Karen began to formulate a plan. She would need to play a dangerous game of cat and mouse, anticipating the HOA's every move and staying one step ahead. It would be a battle of wits and nerves, but she was determined to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the excavation site, Karen's lips curved into a grim smile. She was ready for the fight of her life, and she wouldn't back down until the HOA's reign of terror was finally brought to an end. The days that followed were a tense blur of activity for Karen as she prepared for the HOA's inevitable counterattack. She had gone to ground, holing up in her home and surrounding herself with a network of trusted allies, private investigators, security experts, and a high-powered attorney with a reputation for taking on corrupt institutions. The excavation on her property had stopped, but Karen knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The HOA was biding its time, no doubt plotting its next move. She could feel their watchful eyes on her every step, the palpable sense of danger like a noose slowly tightening around her neck. In the quiet moments, Karen pored over the evidence in her file, searching for any weaknesses or vulnerabilities she could exploit. The HOA's web of corruption ran deep, implicating not just the board members, but local politicians, law enforcement, and even members of the judiciary. It was a daunting task, but Karen was driven by an unwavering determination to see justice served. As the days turned into weeks, Karen's nerves began to fray. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping at every unexpected sound. The HOA's silence was deafening, and she knew they were just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then, one night, the unthinkable happened. Karen was jolted awake by the sound of breaking glass, and before she could react, a figure materialized in the darkness of her bedroom. Heart pounding, she reached for the panic button hidden beneath her nightstand, but a gloved hand clamped down on her wrist, stopping her in her tracks. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mrs. Harrington," a gruff voice whispered, the faint smell of cigarette smoke hanging in the air. Karen's blood ran cold as she recognized the voice. It was the foreman from the excavation site. Swallowing hard, she tried to keep her composure even as her mind raced with the implications of his presence in her home. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. The foreman's grip tightened and Karen winced in pain. "You've been a thorn in the HOA's side for far too long," he growled. "It's time we put an end to your little crusade." Karen's heart pounded in her ears as the realization dawned on her that HOA was willing to resort to violence to silence her. She had pushed them too far, and now she was paying the price. As the foreman's dark silhouette loomed over her, Karen knew she was running out of time. She had to find a way to turn the tables, to regain the upper hand in this deadly game of cat and mouse. The future of her community and her own survival depended on it. Adrenaline coursing through her veins, Karen's mind raced as she desperately searched for a way out of her predicament. The foreman's grip on her wrist was unyielding, and she knew that any sudden movement could provoke a violent reaction. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The foreman leaned in, his breath hot on her face. "You know exactly what we want, Mrs. Harrington," he hissed. "Those documents you've been gathering, we want them. All of them." Karen's heart sank. She had poured her heart and soul into building that case against the HOA, and the thought of handing it over to her enemies was almost more than she could bear. But with the foreman's threat looming over her, she knew she had no choice. "All right," she conceded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll give you the documents, but I want something in return." The foreman let out a harsh laugh. "You're hardly in a position to be making demands, Mrs. Harrington. But go on, let's hear what you have to offer." Karen took a deep breath, her mind racing. "I want assurances that you and the HOA will leave me and my family alone. No more threats, no more retaliation. And I want a guarantee that you'll dismantle this entire corrupt organization." The foreman's grip tightened and Karen winced in pain. "You're in no position to be making demands, you foolish woman," he growled. "We're the ones in control here, and you do well to remember that." Karen's eyes narrowed, a glimmer of defiance flickering in her gaze. "Then you're just as bad as the HOA. You claim to want to end their corruption, but you're no better than they are. You're just as ruthless, just as power-hungry." The foreman's face contorted with rage, and Karen braced herself for the inevitable blow. But before he could act, a loud crash echoed from the living room, followed by the sound of voices and the heavy thud of boots. Karen's heart leaped with hope. Her allies had arrived. The foreman must have sensed the same, for he cursed under his breath and released his grip on her wrist, darting towards the window. Karen watched, breathless, as the foreman vanished into the night, leaving her alone in the darkness. She sighed with relief, but the respite was short-lived as her rescuers burst into the room, their weapons drawn. "Mrs. Harrington, are you all right?" one of them asked, his voice laced with concern. Karen nodded, her mind still reeling from the encounter. "I'm fine," she said, her voice barely audible, "but I have a feeling this is only the beginning." As the sun rose over the gated community, Karen sat in the dimly lit study, her face etched with a mixture of determination and exhaustion. The previous night's confrontation with the HOA's foreman had left her shaken, but more resolved than ever to take down the corrupt organization that had terrorized her and her neighbors for far too long. Clutching the incriminating file, Karen pored over the evidence, her mind racing the possibilities. She knew the HOA would not be deterred by her allies' intervention. If anything, they would only retaliate with greater force. The stakes had never been higher, and she needed to formulate a plan that would not only protect her family, but also bring the HOA's reign of terror to a permanent end. Reaching for the phone, Karen dialed a familiar number, her fingers trembling slightly. The call was answered after a few rings, and she wasted no time in laying out the details of her predicament. "I need your help," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The HOA is closing in, and I don't know how much time I have left." The voice on the other end was calm, reassuring. "Don't worry, Karen. We've been anticipating this. I have a plan, but it's going to be risky." Karen's heart raced as she listened, her mind weighing the potential consequences. This was a dangerous gambit, one that could either secure her victory or seal her downfall. But with the HOA's noose tightening around her neck, she knew she had no choice but to take the risk. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady. "What do I need to do?" The plan was set in motion, and as the day wore on, Karen found herself caught in a tense, high-stakes game of cat and mouse. She moved with purpose, her every step calculated as she executed her role in the scheme. The HOA's agents shadowed her every move, but she refused to be intimidated, her resolve hardening with each passing hour. As night fell, Karen found herself at the center of a carefully orchestrated confrontation, with the fate of her community hanging in the balance. The air was thick with tension, and the slightest misstep could prove disastrous. But Karen was not one to be underestimated. With a steely glint in her eye, she stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "This ends tonight, HOA. I'm done playing by your rules." The stage was set for a showdown, and Karen was more than ready to face her enemies head-on. The air was charged with tension as Karen stood her ground, her eyes locked with those of the HOA board members who had gathered around her. The flickering streetlights cast eerie shadows across their faces, but Karen refused to be intimidated. "You've gone too far this time, Karen." One of the board members, a slick-haired man named Maxwell, sneered. "Did you really think you could outsmart us?" Karen's lips curved into a sardonic smile. "I didn't think, Maxwell. I knew." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled group. "And now the evidence I've gathered is about to be released to the public. Your corruption, your lies, your dirty little secrets, all of it, laid bare for the world to see." A murmur of alarm rippled through the crowd, and Karen felt a surge of triumph. Her gambit had paid off, and now the HOA was on the defensive. "You're bluffing," Maxwell spat, his composure slipping. "You don't have the power to do that." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Oh, but I do. You see, I've been working with a powerful ally, one who has the resources and the connections to make sure your reign of terror ends tonight." As if on cue, the roar of an engine pierced the night, and a sleek black SUV came barreling down the street, screeching to a halt just feet from the gathering. The driver's side door swung open and a tall, imposing figure emerged, his sharp features illuminated by the headlights. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," the man said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Karen watched with satisfaction as the color drained from Maxwell's face. He knew exactly who this man was, a powerful, well-connected figure, with the resources and influence to bring the Himo to its knees. "You can't do this," Maxwell stammered, his voice laced with desperation. "We have connections, influence, you can't touch us." The man's lips curled into a humorless smile. "Oh, but I can. And I will. You see, Karen here has provided me with irrefutable evidence of your corruption, and I've made sure that it will be released to the public unless you comply with my demands." The Ajoa board members exchanged panicked glances, the realization dawning on them that their carefully constructed power structure was crumbling before their eyes. "What do you want?" Maxwell asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dissolution," the man replied, his tone unwavering. "I want the HOA dismantled, its assets seized, and its members prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. If you refuse, well, you let the threat hang in the air," his gaze unwavering. Karen watched as the HOA board members, their faces etched with defeat, reluctantly agreed to the man's demands. It was a victory, but one tinged with a sense of unease. She knew that the battle was far from over, and that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But for now, she could savor the moment knowing that she had emerged victorious in this high-stakes game of power and corruption. The once imposing gates of the gated community stood open, the symbol of the seismic changes that had swept through the neighborhood. Gone were the days of the HOA's oppressive rule, replaced by a newfound sense of freedom and possibility. Karen stood at the threshold, her gaze sweeping across the familiar streets. The excavation site on her property had been filled in, the last physical remnant of the HOA's former power. She felt a weight lifted from her shoulders, but the sense of unease lingered. She knew that the battle was far from over. The dismantling of the HOA had left a power vacuum, and she feared that opportunistic individuals or groups would seek to fill the void. But she was determined to be vigilant, to ensure that the community she loved would never again fall under the sway of such a corrupt and manipulative entity. As she walked through the neighborhood, Karen couldn't help but notice the changed atmosphere. Neighbors who had once been at each other's throats now greeted one another with warm smiles and a newfound sense of camaraderie. The air felt lighter, the tension that had once hung over the community now dissipated. She stopped to chat with a few of her neighbors, listening to their stories of relief and optimism. They spoke of plans to revitalize the community, to build a new, more inclusive and equitable vision for the future. Karen couldn't help but feel a surge of pride, knowing that her actions had played a pivotal role in this transformation. But as she returned to her home, the weight of responsibility once again settled on her shoulders. She knew that the road ahead would not be an easy one, that there would be challenges and setbacks along the way. But she was ready, her resolve hardened by the battles she had fought and won. With a deep breath, Karen stepped into her home, her gaze drawn to the now empty spot on her desk where the incriminating file had once rested. It was a bittersweet moment, a reminder of the sacrifices she had made and the risks she had taken. But as she turned to gaze out the window, she couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism. The future may have been uncertain, but she knew that the community she loved was now in their own hands, free from the tyrannical grip of the HOA. And that, to Karen, was worth every moment of the struggle.